Bell Hooks's mother was a maid. Her father was a janitor. Today's about service workers. And their experiences really, if you read some of Bell Hooks's work, it really influenced a lot of what she wrote, particularly her class analysis. I was introduced to Bell Hooks in an ethnic studies class when I was a freshman in college, like something years ago, right? At UC Berkeley. And we read the essay, Keeping Close to Home, Class and Education. And in preparing for today, I'm drawing on that particular essay. I want to start this event by sort of drawing on Hooks's work. And in this essay, Hooks, she really shared her experience as a first gen Black college student and eventually faculty member, really navigating racist classism in higher ed, and the need to always really remain grounded in her community where she came from to survive and to thrive the academy. I want to share, we have this big event plan, right? I have a lot of questions for the editors, but I did want to share, just to begin, a few excerpts from this essay as a tribute to the work of LT, Georgina, and Stephanie, and the contributors. Many of you I know are in the room, to campus service workers supporting first-gen students. I think that this book, your book, it really exemplifies the long-lasting contributions of Bell Hooks. And I think it's the right thing to do to call her into this space today. So calling Bell Hooks, welcome too. I'm going to share with you things that I consider gems from this essay, Keeping Close to Home. I think it helps to contextualize the significance of the work that LT, Stephanie, and Georgina are doing on campus service workers. So I'm going to read some of those things. These are not my own. This is Bell Hooks, right? Y'all right? Okay with that? Yes. Okay, it's just going to take a couple minutes. To be materially underprivileged at a university where most folks, with the exception of workers, are materially privileged provokes such thought. I talked to no one about the sources of my shame, how it hurt me to witness the contempt shown to the brown-skinned Filipina maids who cleaned our rooms, or later my concern about the $100 a month I paid for a room off campus, which is more than half of what my parents paid for rent. I did not intend to forget my class background or alter my class allegiance. And even though I received an education designed to provide me with a bourgeoisie sensibility, passive acquiescence was not my only option. I knew that I could resist, I could rebel, I could shape the direction and focus of the various forms of knowledge available to me. When my father retired after more than 30 years of work as a janitor, I wanted to pay tribute to this experience to identify links between his work and my own as a writer and teacher. The most powerful resource any of us can have as we study and teach in university settings is full understanding and appreciation of the richness, beauty, and primacy of our familial and community backgrounds. Maintaining awareness of class differences, nurturing ties with the poor and working class people who are our most intimate kin, our comrades in struggle, transforms and enriches our intellectual experience. Education as the practice of freedom becomes not a force which fragments or separates, but one that brings us closer, expanding our definitions of home and community. So again, the great words of Bell Hooks in this essay, Keeping Close to Home. And I really wanted to share the work of Hooks because she encouraged us to do what we think matters, right? And I think campus service workers supporting first generation students as a project, that's an example of education as a practice of freedom. LT, Georgina, and Stephanie, you resisted, you rebelled, you brought together a community of first gen badasses, right? To document the power and contributions of campus service workers, our comrades in struggle. And I really believe that this book, your book, is your love letter to all the first gen students who found family in the people on campus who most reminded us of home. And so I feel so honored to celebrate this publication with all of you, Georgina, Stephanie, and our femtor, LT. I'm rounding up. I was trying to think of how long have I known y'all, right? I'm rounding up, but I've known LT and Georgina for almost 2 decades. And all my years as a scholar, And I'm thankful through them. I'm now in community with Stephanie. I'm going to briefly introduce them for those of you who are just beginning to learn their fire. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the hour engaging them in a discussion around the book before opening it up to your comments and your questions. Does that sound like a good plan, y'all? Yeah, okay, thank you. Georgina Guzman is an associate professor of English at Cal State Channel Islands, a daughter of Mexican immigrants. She received her PhD in English at UCLA, where she was a proud first generation college student. Her research and teaching interests center on exploring how one's social consciousness can be raised through relationships to working class laborers and immigrants in community-based service learning, and within Chicana, Chicano, Latina, Latino literature and poetry. She received the Community Engaged Faculty Award from the Center for Community Engagement at Channel Islands, as well as the Classroom Excellence Award from the California Association of Teachers of English. She's the co-editor of the anthology, Making a Killing, Femicide, Free Trade in La Frontera, and has published articles in Latino Studies and Reflections, a journal of community-based writing and rhetoric. Our next editor, a proud first-generation college graduate, Latanya LT Rease Miles, PhD, is the outgoing Dean of Student Affairs at Menlo College and former Director of First-Year Experiences at UCLA. Beginning January 2022, she will be a partner and director of scale and impact at Career Launch. LT is the creator of the Empowering First Gen College Students National Facebook page, a founder of the University of California First Generation Consortium, and a founder of the National Black First Gen Collective. LT obtained her PhD in American Literature from UCLA and holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland, College Park in English language and literature. She's interested in first-gen college narratives and the hidden curriculum in higher ed. Those of you who've worked with LT, you know that she's all about that. But we also know she's passionate about basketball, football, The Flash, and Friday Night Lights. Right? A range of interests, LT. And our third editor, Stephanie Santos Youngblood, received her BA in Political Science from the University of Connecticut and master's degree in TESOL from Teachers College at Columbia University. She's worked as a K-12 and adult ESL bilingual instructor and academic counselor. From 2014 to 2020, she served as the program director for UCLA's Project SPELL, Students for Progress in Employee Language Learning, a volunteer program which paired UCLA students with campus service workers for one-on-one tutoring in English. And Stephanie is currently an EDD student who just finished up her semester at Arizona State University, and she's studying the ways that colleges and universities can improve institutional support for neurodiverse students during the college transition. Her work on this text honors the life and legacy of Kaylin A. Croft, a custodian at Vermont Elementary School in San Bernardino, whose interactions with students exemplify the support, comfort, and joy offered by so many of his fellow campus service workers. So if y'all can just join me in giving LT and Georgina and Stephanie some love with your emojis in the chat, etc. Just want to, acknowledge the work that they've done. If any of you have ever contributed or edited a book project, you know that that is a labor of love. And so I really want to name that, right? I want to call that out. But in addition to LT, Georgina, and Stephanie, this book would not have been possible without the book's contributors, right? So at this time, I'd like to ask for all of the contributors who are in the room to identify yourself in the chat, give us an emoji to let us know you're here. Without you, this book would not have happened. Thank you for your stories and congratulations on being published authors, right? I know that, as editors, you all shepherded some people's very first opportunities to really highlight like their brilliance. And so I think that's something to really celebrate today. Also, on behalf of the editors, I'd like to thank Routledge for publishing the book. For those of you who don't know, it's hella difficult to get Routledge to publish your book. So that in and of itself is a feat. And also Jordan Beltran Gonzalez, who served as an editor for the book project. We want to
thank you, Jordan.
We also want to thank all of you for being here, as well as all the people you identified in the chat who made a difference in your journey, right? Today is all about celebrating everybody who's done anything and everything, oftentimes that invisible labor to get us where we're at, right? So, you know, in preparing for today, we discussed, right, how important it was for you all as audience members to really not only understand the content of the book, but also the process of how the book came to be. I think for first-gen scholars, publishing is definitely a hidden curriculum many of us have yet to master, and may never master. And so part of today is to dispel the writing and publishing process. So I'm going to begin with some questions for our esteemed editors. And as they're sharing, I really encourage you to put questions or comments in the chat. Let them know when you're feeling something, when you're vibing off of what they're sharing. Because, you know, right now in this sort of setting, that immediate feedback is really important, I think, in this kind of venue, right? But before I go ahead and ask all the questions that I have, right? I wanted to see if LT or Stephanie and Georgina wanted to say anything before we get started on that part of the program.
Nah, I'm good. Thank y'all for coming tonight.
Stephanie, Georgina, nothing? Y'all gonna talk. Okay.
We're gonna talk a lot in the next few minutes, so.
yeah, you know, and even when we met, you know, we had so many ideas with regards to what to talk about, where, you know, the direction this thing could go. So again, we're going to focus on both not only the content, but also the process of this book becoming, right? So I want to begin with LT, right? I want to ask LT to go ahead and start, and if you can share, what's the origin story of this book?
Thanks, Tracy. And also just want to continue to thank all of our contributors. Some of them are being kind of shy, but many of them are here in the space. So let me start with the personal story and then move to how we got to the book. So as everyone knows, I identify as a first generation student, but we often don't talk about the hidden curriculum that first gens have. We talk about the hidden curriculum of institutions, but not the kind of hidden curriculum we master before we even get there. So for me, even though it wasn't taught to me explicitly, and I've had this conversation with my mother, it was absolutely a given that I show respect to service workers and people who clean up. Like, I'm the type of person, when I see a mess in public, I'm like, who's gonna clean that up, right? So when I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill my freshman year, I was really surprised by how other students treated the service workers. There's just no way I could address someone with just their first name and not say Mr. or Miss, especially if they were cleaning up after me. Like, that was just unimaginable, right? So anyway, when I went to Chapel Hill, I was immediately drawn to the custodian of my building, who I refer to as Mr. Stanley. And he reminded me of just someone in my family. And like, that's the type of work that I was more accustomed to seeing, which is domestic type of labor, or, you know, things with your hands, et cetera. And so as at the time, I didn't know I was experiencing culture shock. I didn't even know I was first gen, but I spent a lot of time talking about my experience with Mr. Stanley when I would come home, like during break, when I would come to my res hall, like between classes and whatnot. Ultimately, I decided to transfer to from Chapel Hill, went on to 2 other institutions, but I'll never forget, that was back in 1988. I'll never forget, obviously, the relationship I had with this person. So let's jump ahead a bit to a couple, maybe it was 2018, 2019, and I was reading the book many of us are familiar with, Becoming College Ready. Becoming Student Ready, sorry, Becoming Student Ready, edited by Tia McNair. And there's a tiny, tiny bit, that book is talking about what institutions need to do to really support underserved students. And there's a tiny mention about service workers. And that just stayed with me, like it just turned over in my mind so much that I ended up writing a blog post about it. And it was shared nationally through NASPA. And then I decided to just do a 15-minute talk on it because I just wanted to do something. It just really stayed with me. And I was still working at UCLA at the time, and Georgina emailed me because she had read my blog post and said, LT, we really should do something. I think Gina said we should do a book. She'll tell her version of the story. This is my version of the story. And I mean, those of you who know me, like, okay, let's do it. All right, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're gonna figure this out. And so that's what kicked it off, Tracy, is reflecting on my personal experience. And then there's a really interesting TED Talk that talks about a first follower. And Georgina was my first follower. So I had an idea, but things don't really take off until you have someone, the hype person behind you. And Georgina was my hype person.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a correct story. So of the version of events. But yeah, so I got tenure and promotion, and I got a sabbatical right before the pandemic. So in January 2020, I got tenure, I got promotion. I was like, I'm gonna write my book right now that I have the privilege to just write what I want to write and say what I want to say. I'm gonna get to it. And as I started to write, I realized that I had a lot of trauma from my undergrad and grad school, as we all do, right? But I started writing really my memoir about how my first year experiences in college and how I wanted to drop out, right? Like, I guess it was finally my reflection after having made it so far and getting tenure, thinking back on how I got here. And so I sat down to write this, and I realized as I was writing that, one of the major reasons I didn't drop out was because of the señoras in the housekeeping staff in my dorm room, right? That would come to like clean our bathrooms. And I was so alienated, right? Like I didn't talk to anybody. My roommates were just like, well, it was bad. They were not first gen, they had money, they were wealthy white women. And they criminalized me since the moment I got there. When I got into the dorm room, they were like, oh, Georgina Guzman? Like, oh, we thought you were Jewish. And I was like, no, I'm Mexican. They just made my life bad that first year in college. I totally want to leave. But it was the housekeeping staff, then in the dining halls, right? Like the workers there that would like talk to me when I was eating my breakfast, lunch, and dinner all by myself. It was the dining hall staff that would talk to me and help support me. So that was the story that I ended up writing about, and which the essay makes its way into the book. But when I was thinking about that story, I reached out to LT. I was like, LT, I remember you had a similar story. Like, we need to, these stories are important. We need to tell them. And I've never seen anything written. Like, LT's essay was the first thing I'd ever seen about the importance of campus service workers and how important they are for student retention, right, and success. So that's why we set out to compile this. And it was LT started, and then I was like, we have to do this. And then she connected me to Stephanie Youngblood, who was doing this work on the ground, right? So she was really important for the book because she had so many students who were serving as tutors with campus facilities workers at UCLA and doing service learning like on campus. So she had a great influence on the book, bringing in great contributors to our collection. So Stephanie, like if you want to jump in and tell us more about that origin story.
Yeah, I know that LT and Georgina were already working on this together, and I think LT texted me or posted something, I forget exactly how it started, and she was just kind of like, you know, if you want to submit something, if you want to join as an editor. And from my point of view, I was just like, well, an editor, like I mean, that can't be me. And I remember asking her, like, can I be a junior editor? Can I be an assistant to the editor? Like, I just didn't feel that I was on like the LT level yet. But those of y'all that know LT know that she is one of the few people who holds doors open for people. And I'm gonna include first gens in that group because there's a lot of first gens that make it and then take great relish in slamming doors in people's faces because they want people to go through what they've been through. And LT is one of the people that will hold the door open and doesn't even let you think about it. It's just like, well, do it or don't. And I was like, okay. And it took actually took a lot of nerve for me to be like, well, I do want to be a part of this and to actually just say that. But yeah, then from there, I think, you know, they already had a really solid idea at that point of kind of what the theoretical framework was going to be for the book. And like Georgina said, I think I was just everything they were talking about to me, I felt like I had a story about it happening in real life. And that's where a lot of the contributors that y'all might see in the chat or here tonight, I'm just gonna shout them out real quick. Yanchan, Martita, Susie, Doris, Isis. Did I forget anyone? Oh my God, if I did, I'm gonna be really sad. But yeah, they're great and they have these stories that they weren't just tutoring people. We're not just doing this for a class. There's something so much deeper to it that much like me, I think they were hesitant to really take like full ownership of because so often that little corner where you are with that service worker, that mentor, that person that understands you, whoever they may be, it's not always recognized, understood, and celebrated, you know, in the larger group. And so I think for me, Gina and LT, like we each kind of brought our little perspective and it just all came together perfectly.
Yeah, you know, and what I'm hearing is that, you know, the way that you're describing campus service workers holding space for you all, you know, that then informed how you went on to hold space for others as well, right? And I think that's something that's really significant about your project, right? So now you have this idea and you're committed to doing it, right? Georgina, what was the response when you actually asked for people to contribute, right? Like who responded, how many and what type of submissions did you get?
Yeah, so when we put out the call, you know, we were worried because it was the beginning of the pandemic. It was like April 2020. And we thought, oh my God, like who's gonna be in the headspace to write an essay? You know, when you're at during stay home orders and just fearing the worst. But you know, I think, you know, we ended up getting a lot, I think probably about 50 essays, and we selected 24. So about half of the essays that we got. So we had to turn away a lot, actually. So we thought that nobody was going to write at that time, but actually they did. And I think the reason that they did is because we all realized, especially during that really scary time, right, that the campus service workers were in the front lines, cleaning up the institution. They were the ones putting their lives in danger. They were the ones, you know, that were being exposed. Sometimes, you know, they had to clean out dorm rooms where there's a student with COVID and like they didn't have the proper PPE. They were the first to be let go and fired of many institutions, and all these stories came out right at the time. So I think that really made all of us conscientious about the important work that workers did on campus, putting their lives at stake, and made us reflect on how important they had been all along, right? They were the invisible workers that literally put their lives on the line to keep the institution going. So I think that's why we had so many submissions. I know that was in the back of my mind when I was writing my essay. I was like, this is for them, like the institution like exploits all of us, and they don't, and so I think that was the reason that there was such an outcry, and people really wrote such passionate essays, right? And so in terms of, so we had lots of essays to select from, but the ones that made it were the ones that provided insights into a unique student service worker relationship, and they really blew our minds. They provided paradigm shifts, allowed us to rethink what we thought we knew, right? There were stories that, man, like when we were going over the essays, with Stephanie and Altina, we were like crying. Like every single story was like, oh my God, like these are the kinds of things no one ever talks about. I can share, and I don't know if Isis is here. Isis, but hers is like a Latina student as a STEM major. She was a chemistry major at UCLA, and just talking about the isolation she felt as like the only Latina in her chemistry classes. But she studied in the chemistry building, and she tutored one of the maintenance workers there. And so La Señora would, literally, when they had to study, she had the keys for all the offices in the chemistry building. So they needed to find a space to study. And she was like, oh, here, let's go in the grad lounge and we can like study in the grad lounge. And she was like, are you sure? She's like, yeah, come on. So she like literally had the keys to the chemistry grad lounge and opened the doors, like literally for Isis, right? So she could go there and just see what the grad lounge was like and feel like she belonged there, right? And so it was just like stories like that, and we'll hear from many other contributors, but stories that I just had never heard about that just really were so beautiful, powerful stories. So so there was lots of contributors, but really we selected the stories that went there, right? That were critical of power dynamics, systems of power in the university, and who got exploited, who was doing the labor, and who was not recognized, and really shed light on that, right? So yeah, so all the essays are really like, these are like brilliant writers. And the other thing was that we were not elitist and hierarchical. Like we were not trying to publish like, established scholars in the field and, like up and rising, full props. Like, no, like a lot of they're like undergrads or they're barely graduated college. So we're not looking for like this, elite model of publication. Like we were interested in selecting the stories that told a powerful story about the important relationships on campus. So yeah, we weren't interested in like, if they had too much academic jargon, if they got bogged down in like trying to quote all the theory out there, like we're like, no, like we want to hear your story. So those are the essays that we selected. Yeah, and you can jump in.
I just want to add one thing. We got to give one shout out to Jada, because Jada was the first one who submitted. Y'all remember? She was our first proposal. And when we read her proposal, we were like, this is it, it's gonna be fire. So Jada couldn't be here today, Jada Anderson, but she's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the essays also they're majority Black and Latino first gens that were students in PWIs and predominantly white institutions, right? And that I think was really important. It was in those spaces that were the most alienating, right? That students had those reactions and wrote those essays. So it was interesting to see that, right? Like there was not many submissions from like HSIs or historically black colleges, right? It was students of color who had gone to PWIs and had like all these stories to tell. Yeah.
I'm going to add to what Gina's saying, just to kind of point out that one thing we talked about when we were the three of us together is this trope that kind of comes up. It takes different forms, but in this context, I called it like the magical service worker, where people really had like a one-dimensional view of the service worker as just someone that was still there to serve them and, you know, lift them up when they were feeling sad, or just pop up out of nowhere and give them like, you know, one little piece of advice, and then they just disappeared like into thin air and were never seen or heard from again. And I think what we really wanted was, you know, essays that dug a little bit deeper into the relationship and thought a little bit more about the identity and considered that worker as more than just a worker, but as like a full human being with layers and dimensions and a whole life outside of being there for that person. And so I think the essays that we ended up with, you know, they have different angles, right? They're not all telling the same story, but you really get a peek into like a little bit of a deeper connection, I think. And you can understand what was special about those relationships beyond just that person was kind to me when I needed someone, or they looked like me and that was cool. Like it goes beyond that.
And I think what you're saying about like the commodification of workers, you know, even by people who have like good intent, you know, like it still happens. And I think it's something that the Academy conditions us to do by sort of like drawing divisions between, you know, people who look like us, right? But might not have had the opportunities to pursue what we're pursuing, right? Stephanie, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what can readers expect from the book? Because you have 25 essays, 25 distinct essays. How did you organize those essays? I know that you have 3 sections, right? So maybe you can talk about the way that the book is organized and how you came up with those themes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we organized and reorganized this so many times, because as the individual essays developed and people wrote drafts and rewrote drafts, and sometimes like what we ended up with was completely different. Also, I know like my essay was like the last one to be written. So like we kind of already had a framework by that point, but we tried to be really organic with it. And what we ended up with is an initial section that talks about paradigm shifts and, you know, kind of what you were just saying, Tracy, about rethinking how we look at this group of people. They have been treated as disposable. And I think it's a travesty that usually the most diverse workforce on campus is also the lowest paid, is also the most disposable, is also the most disrespected. I've heard stories that made me want to fight someone. LT knows, she's had to tell me like, Stephanie, don't fight anyone. Because sometimes it's just it makes me so angry. Like, who do you think you are? At the end of the day, you're a human being, they're a human being. Like, what gives you the right? But like I think LT was mentioning earlier, there's just a totally different mindset coming in when you think about like someone that's serving you, right? And so I think, you know, we also got feedback, even, you know, we had the dreaded like reviewer number 2 when we submitted the proposal to Routledge, that hated everything and was just like, why would you want people to look up to custodians? Why? And I was like, I don't know, because they're like multi-layered human beings that have stuff to say and like have wisdom and life experience, and there are elders. I mean, I could think of like a million more reasons off the top of my head. But there are people that really kind of, I think, subscribe to this view that a lot of us have been conditioned to believe in, which is like, when you rise up that ladder, like you don't look back, you don't go back down. And I don't really see it as going back down anywhere, but we really wanted to have those essays that kind of set the stage for the way that we were looking at this topic, right? And then the middle section is has the most essays, and it's a lot of counter stories, personal narratives. And, you know, I think that's where you really do get to see, okay, we have 2 students who just checking off the demographic boxes on their application might look the same, but they had their own unique experiences that were informed by a lot of different things and that influenced them in a lot of different ways. And what are those things? You know, I can think of course, Jada, who LT talked about, speaking about being a Black woman on campus, and just hearing someone that like had a lot of the same cultural background as her, right? But then we also had Yunchan, who talked about meeting a Korean service worker who again also shared his cultural background, but that's just the starting point for the stories, right? Like where they go is different. And that's why we have those types of really, really personal narratives that just illustrate like that whole process of transformation that people went through, or that process of support and what that looks like, that a lot of colleges and universities don't want to do. Like they don't want to actually do these things that engender a sense of belonging in their students. And they don't want to recognize that, yes, your lowest paid workers are actually doing this more than your administrators oftentimes. And then we have a final section that's really a call to action and praxis, and it shows a few of the projects that the contributors have been working on that just give us some ideas for what can we do, especially now that I think LT mentioned it, it's COVID, and a lot of these workers were just like dismissed. It was like, oh, well, you know, sorry about it, good luck in life. Or if they did get to stay, they were forced to do a lot of work that they weren't comfortable with, like being exposed to a lot of COVID patients, students, even workers in the hospital, that, you know, they didn't even have PPE. And so we really wanted to kind of shine a light on not just the ideas, but what people are really doing. So like put their money where their mouth, is that the expression? Put your money where your mouth is? Someone help me. LT, Gina? Yes, put your money where your mouth is. And do something, you know, prove it. Don't just say it, but prove it, do it.
Yeah, and I love that the book ends that way. You know, again, it goes back to what Bell Hooks is identifying as service workers, as our comrades in struggle, right? And how oftentimes like those are the folks that are really making like the difference in people's everyday lives, right? Now, this question is, you know, is directed at LT, but if you're a contributor, please feel free to add anything in the chat reflecting on your experience. But how did first gen identities actually shape the writing process for you and the contributors? Right? So how do first gen identities actually shape your writing process?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I want to acknowledge Lindsay and Belinda, especially because they're here in their piece in the last section where they detail the kind of action that took place on their campus with regard to service workers. So please be sure to check. So thank you for your work, but be sure to check their piece out. NJ, are you here able to say anything at all, NJ? So, okay, I'm gonna call on you, so I'm prepping you right now. One thing I wanna mention, so with 20, like so many contributors, Tracy, we decided to, like we assigned ourselves to a subgroup of folks. And so while we read, all of us, all 3 of us read everything, we worked really closely with, we were assigned to individual writers, contributors. And so a level, like we became really intimate with those pieces for sure. And NJ is one of them. And I would say we really went on a journey together, I would say. I remember how NJ's piece started. Well, first of all, like there were some fabulous elements in her piece. But NJ, to be fair, I think there were some moments of doubt that you had too. And I was like pushing you. I was like, you got this, you got this. And I think, okay, so you need to talk. Can you talk? Can you talk about this experience?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, LT. So nice to be with everyone. But yes, I think I needed direction. And the feedback that I received was certainly helped me focus, but it also, I think it did more than that. It made me feel like that the story that I wanted to tell, which in my case was about going to university with my father, who is a tool and die maker, but also my father is biracial. He's a language minority. And really, anyways, yes, your direction really helped me. I wanted to say that this was the least violent opportunity I've ever had to work with. I feel like I had contact with all of LT. I had so much. Well, first you communicated with me, which was lovely. But all of you, right? Georgina, Stephanie, the three of you. Listen, I'm not surprised that this was a project that was led by three women of color, and for somebody like me, it was, I would say, the first time I ever felt like I belonged somewhere. So thank you.
Lord, I didn't expect that because now I'm crying. But so that was just an example, just NJ and I, that was just one example, because my goodness, when you read that piece and see what NJ is doing, like Georgina talked about this at the beginning, like you all will read some stories that have never, ever been told. And NJ's is such a great example of it, but also it includes poetry, original poetry. It's just like once you like toward the end of the book, you see like genre, breaks and things like that. And NJ's was a part of it. So Tracy, like to get back to your question, like many of us we were doing this for the first time. We were really thoughtful and intentional about our own prior experiences. I've contributed to a book before, I haven't led one. And Stephanie kind of alluded to this earlier when we're engaging with the editor and asking us like about our pieces and then asking us which piece is the weakest. It was such a capitalist approach, like identify the weakest and cut it out. And we were really intent on like developing people right from the start, like as much as we could, but we had a time. I mean, we did have a like a cutoff, like a deadline, of course. But we wanted to like be really intentional about how we supported people. So thank you, NJ. It's such a beautiful piece, and that's just one example.
I think we need to call Martha to the stage. Martha Shunkach to the stage. Cause hey girl. You want to talk about how your first gen identity and any other identities informed your writing process and why you, I guess, wanted to tell this story, I think is the question.
Yes. So, when I got into UCLA, I was obviously really excited, but, when I got into campus, it was just a little bit not of what I was expecting. My dad is Maya Canjobal. My mom is Mexican, and it was just really difficult for me to find a community within campus. Especially being first generation, I don't have anyone else to look up to in terms of, is this what y'all felt? Is this what everyone's feeling? And I think that that's a topic that's not often talked about. And honestly, it was just very difficult for me to bring up to my friends as well. It wasn't until I came across Project Spell that I began to feel a community. And I thank Stephanie every day for that, because I saw the little advertisements that what was it? What's it called? The
BCAP?
No, it wasn't BCAP. It was
B-Plate.
B-Plate.
Girl, you graduated like 12 months ago. Come on.
I saw the little advertisement there and it was something that immediately spoke to me. I applied and then, when I got in and I met Norberta, um, it wasn't until then that I began to feel at home. I began to look forward to my time there. I was also I was STEM, so I was taking all my math and science courses, and that was particularly difficult because yes, it's easy to meet other Latina women, but it's difficult to meet other Indigenous women in STEM. And so meeting Norberta and getting to talk about our backgrounds, getting to talk about our experiences, it felt nice, and it was something that I couldn't, or at least didn't want to talk about with my parents. To my parents, I wanted them to know that I was doing well, I wasn't struggling, I was doing amazing in these STEM classes. But with Norberta, it was kind of difficult for it to not be something we can talk about. She saw how stressed I was, she saw how tired I was, and it was something that she constantly checked in with me about. And it felt good to be able to unwind to someone that was a mother figure to me by the end of our time there. So yeah, I mean, that played a huge role in my retention within UCLA, because I don't know where I would have been without her. And I'm just really grateful for Stephanie. I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry, but I'm just really grateful for that community that you presented to us. It really made a big impact on me.
No, thank you for that, Martha. Oh, Georgina, did you want to add?
Thank you for sharing, Martha. And I wanted to just add really quickly that was something that kept on coming up in a lot of the essays, that for a lot of us, the workers on campus that looked like us, that spoke our language, they became like, we identified with them like as parent figures, right? And as Martha said, like, we wouldn't necessarily call our parents if we weren't doing well, because you don't want them to know you're not doing well. So they became parent figures for a lot of us. For me too, Martha. So I can totally relate to your story. So yeah, that was something that came up.
Yeah, and
I'll just say one more thing real quick.
Go for it.
Yeah, no. I just want to say, like, there are a lot of personal narratives. But shout out to like the research studies as well, and the other theoretical pieces. TMARC. I mean, TMARC is personal, but it's really like it's a theory that he's posing right at the beginning. And Andrea and Allison's piece, like right from the jump, like the intro to the book sets everything up. So I just wanted to acknowledge those as well.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Georgina.
Oh, if TMARC, if you want to say a little bit about your essay, since you're here.
Absolutely, I'm honored to been a part of this. I was actually in a co-edited book for a different project with Dr. Buenavista, so that's sort of interesting as well, but sort of full circle there. I was just reflecting, just listening to all these stories and testimonies and so on, and thinking how my abstract probably did not match what ended up being written, because I was thinking very theoretically and so on, as opposed to writing the narrative and writing the testimony. But I mean, if I were to submit a piece of work that's reflective of what I've done in my career in academia, this would probably be the one, because this is the point where I felt like I was able to weave in the theory with the personal in the way that hopefully I did, and I'm so grateful for it, and I'm waiting now eagerly to write the essay that's going to shout out my mother, as this one focused on my dad. And I think that she certainly somewhere along the way will get the deserved essay that she well deserves. But I'm grateful to have been part of this opportunity, and I welcome any feedback or comments as well once you have a chance to read it. And maybe somebody can tell me what my page numbers are, because I need to update my CV and I haven't received my copy yet. I'm eagerly checking every day my mailbox for the copy of my book. But again, I'm grateful to have just even been a part of this and been with the folks who are here today and the folks that will read it as well.
And I think, T-Mark, your reflection is super significant because, you know, I think you're a little bit seasoned, right? Like in the academy compared to some of the other contributors. And it just goes to show that your first gen identity, it keeps influencing you like forever, right? And sometimes you need other folks like LT, Stephanie, and Georgina to actually give permission, right? To provide permission to sort of be unapologetic in the story that you want to tell, right? Not the story that people expect you to tell. And I think that that's what this book is really about, right? It's sort of capturing that spirit. I want to just ask, you know, we have a couple more questions, but I think I'm just going to end with this one question because I know that people have questions. I know folks have comments. I know that there's Chris's baby in the background. I'm just kidding. No, but I wanted to ask, well, I know there's a background baby.
Can I see the baby?
Well, later, baby. Okay, you're right there. Okay,
There you go.
first gen faculty. Okay, yeah, you're the background baby. Okay.
Out of here.
I'm going to pose a couple of questions, and you know, I think for Georgina and Stephanie, maybe you can take this on. You know, what was it like navigating the publishing process as first gen scholars? And then two, you know, for all of you, right? What does this book mean to you? Like, what do you want readers to take away from this book?
Oh my gosh. Okay, nobody else is talking, so I guess I will. Well, I think the publishing process for me, I mean, I had no idea what to expect, and I think I don't know. I know that sometimes we write things that we kind of expect it to be shot down because we're sending it out to like an audience that just isn't ready to hear it or accept it, or just doesn't have like the context to understand it, or the personal experience to really understand it. But with that being said, like I usually just go into it being like, this is dope, this is amazing. If they don't like it, it's just because there has to be something wrong with them. And LT will tell you that that's because I'm a Scorpio, probably, I don't know. But I think like we were kind of just going into it like they're gonna like it or they're not. And that's, you know, if they don't like it, that's a them problem, because we know based on the response that we got, and it's not just people that submitted, it's also people that just commented or reached out and shared their stories. Like I know Tracy, I know you have a personal story that you just didn't have like the time and bandwidth to write up and share on our, you know, timeline that we were using, but we knew that this was something important. And so I think we just looked at it like, if someone doesn't like it, on to the next, but we need to kind of stay true to ourselves. And every bad experience we've had, getting feedback, whether it's from a professor, a boss, a publisher, a journal, whatever it is, like we just need to kind of break that cycle right here and right now. And treat our contributors like human beings. Like academics are a lot of times treated just like, I don't know, publication machines, just like pump more of them out. I see this all the time on Twitter. I, you know, had 247 things published this year and I still got denied tenure. And I'm like, where does it end? You know, like, it's not really about the quantity. It's about like, what are you putting out there? And we just wanted to kind of create that space and, you know, encourage the contributors to really like write their truth. And how someone else accepts it or not, like we'll, you know, cross that bridge when we come to it. And if Routledge doesn't like it, we'll go to the next. I mean, at least that's how I approached it. I know every once in a while, Georgina would tell me like, okay, Stephanie, but we actually have to respond to the feedback from the publisher. And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess you're right. But maybe I'm a little more defiant. I don't know. But I think that's kind of how I looked at it. It was like, my job here is to, you know, I worked with a lot of my babies who were like really recent UCLA grads or were still in school while they were writing their essays. And I was like, I want them to end up with something that they're really proud of, that other people read and they're like, okay, Martha blew my mind, Sarai blew my mind, Isis blew my mind. That was my goal. And I was like, if somebody in England doesn't get it, that's okay. Not everybody's gonna get it.
Yeah, Tracy, those are big questions. I'm sitting here with my thoughts, but yeah, like Stephanie, right? We knew that the stories that we had here were really powerful and needed to be told, and they rewrote the narrative about the college experience. So we knew that even if, you know, Routledge didn't publish, we would publish with someone else. And yeah, we were like, these are great stories. So we never felt like we couldn't do it. Like we just knew we would do it and we would find the right venue for it. But you know, the only thing is that we didn't know the book was going to be so expensive. So that's one thing though, the first gen publishing experience, that's one thing we didn't know. Like we wanted our work to be accessible to everyone so that everybody could read it, right? But then when we found out how much it was going to cost, we were like, oh shit. So that's one thing we didn't know, and we didn't anticipate. We're not happy about it. So going forward, for volume 2, we will seek a publisher where the books are more accessible. Ebooks though will be cheaper. I think it'll be like $35 or something like that. But yeah, access, that was just, yeah, we were not happy about that. But we'll see. We'll find ways to do that. Yeah, what we want to get out of it is just, like I said, right, telling all of these beautiful, powerful stories that had never seen the light of day. You know, it's the kinds of things like we talk to individuals about stories, like when we would share stories, like, oh yeah, like that happened to me too. Like my colleagues, right, at Cal State Channel Islands, like Jose Alamillo, he published a book, and you know, he told me later on, like, yeah, you know, the facilities like manager, like the guy who cleaned my office, like he gave me all these insights that I incorporate into my book, and like he helped him with his book. And so once we started to share our story, so many other stories came out of like how important campus custodians and workers are. So we just wanted to capture those stories, and you know, and it doesn't end here, right? Hopefully this will just be the beginning of uncovering these stories and, you know, capturing the stories so that the institution values the workers who are there. That's our goal, right? Capturing the stories and trying to seek justice for those who work the hardest but don't always have the most to show for it, and ironically are the most giving of their time and most selfless. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Quick,
LT?
I'll just real quick. My life coach, Megan the Stallion, says, damn, I don't brag enough. And so I'm just going to say this book is a game changer, because it's not, on the one hand, we're telling the untold stories of first gen, of relationships with campus service workers. But honestly, this book is telling some stories about the first gen experience that hasn't been told. We haven't highlighted how there's a lot of focus on that experience outside of college for our first gens who became faculty members, our first gen professionals. Those stories aren't really told. There's not enough stories about first gen Asian Americans, about Black first gen. So there are some unique contributions that will richly add to what we know about first gen students as a whole.
Is everyone excited for the book? I hope so. Right. There was a question in the chat, you know, before we go into the Q&A, you know, can one of you explain how to purchase the book and how participants can organize book talks or presentations at their respective organizations and institutions? How do we buy this book?
So I included the link in the chat. I can put it again. Let's see. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, so there's a link. It's pretty pricey right now. But if you work at an educational institution, you can ask your librarian to purchase it, and then use it to them. The e-copies will also be available. Well, they're available, I think, already, and that's significantly cheaper. So that would probably be the best bet for now. Paperback will come out in like a year, right? So yeah, we're not thrilled about that part, but it's it comes out next year. In terms of booking us, send us a line and we'll be happy to talk about the book with your institution, your organization. We'll make it happen. So many contributors too, right? Like it could be like a couple of us, and we have 25 contributors who I'm sure would be happy to jump on a Zoom talk and talk about their essays.
Yeah, and I see in the chat a suggestion to, contact your student affairs division, and I'll also say campus facilities, which is a part of campus, the organizational chart that's also really ignored, right? And so I think there's a real good opportunity right there to, even have the campus service workers read it, and share their own stories from their own words, right? Now, we have about 20 minutes left. I really want to open it up, the discussion to questions and comments from the audience. Also, we can use this as an opportunity for any of the other contributors who are in the room to just reflect on your own experience. What was it like to work with LT, Stephanie, and Georgina? What's the gossip, right? No, I'm kidding. But, if folks have questions, please feel free to, unmute yourself, right? And go ahead and this is a community space. Go ahead and ask a question or provide a comment. Or again, if you're a contributor, now's your opportunity to reflect on what your experience was like. Not all at once. Maybe LT
We're
and Steph.
We're taking questions and comments. I know Erica. I knew it. I knew my homegirl was gonna have a question.
So thank you so much, everyone. LT, Georgina, I'm getting to meet Stephanie for the first time here. Tracy for moderating, all lovely folks here. I just wanted to ask, was there any stories in which I haven't been able to get my hands on the book yet, but have there been any stories regarding like the reaction of the service workers, of the campus service workers to, like in other words, why the campus service workers, how they felt about their relationship with the student, why they supported the student, how they, what that connection was from their perspective. I mean, I know a lot of this is centered on the student writing, but I was just curious if anybody had anything insight into how, or the campus workers shared with them what their insights were about that relationship. Just curious.
Well, my personal experience, since I do know, I think just more campus service workers, because I think most of us, you might get to know the person that works in your specific office area just by the nature of my role. Like I knew everyone. And sometimes I felt like a celebrity. I was like, I can drop so many names because I know everyone that works on the campus. And it's kind of funny because sometimes they don't get it. They're like, oh, that's cute. Like, yeah, you're just writing about us being decent human beings. Like, I think there's some part of them that doesn't get what the big deal is, because I don't know if they really, well, I'm not going to say the whole group, but there are definitely individuals that have been like, yeah, I was just being like a kind and decent human being and living the values that I was taught by my family and my culture. And even when I will shove it in their face and be like, no, you totally help this person feel comfortable in their cultural identity. And they're like, yeah, I mean, I was just being a good person. Like, there's just some part of it that I think is so second nature to them. But I think also, Martha, sorry, girl, I'm going to call on you again, because I know that you and Norberta were super close and still are. And I know you told her a lot about the book too. So maybe you can share what her perspective is on it.
Yeah, when I first told her about the book, she was like excited about it, but I also feel like she didn't like completely understand. You know, and I explained it to her and she was just like, oh, okay, yeah, like of course you can talk about me. And I was just like, okay, like I expected more excitement, but when I was you know, explaining the role that she's had in my life, she was just like, well, like why wouldn't I act that way? Like why, you know, what would I do otherwise? So for me, it was just like, you're right, like you're of course, but like, you know, it was just it was something that she was grateful for and that she's excited to read. I don't think she's gotten her copy yet. But yeah, I'm excited to like, you know, read it to her because it's in English and I'll have to translate it. But yeah, I mean, definitely her reaction was just like, what would I have done otherwise? Like there, I don't know what I, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, like LT said, there's Yolanda Wigginson's piece, and she's a professor at San Jose State in sociology. Her essay interviewed 20 in-depth interviews with custodial staff on campus. So yeah, hers is great. And there's an essay on Mauricio, which was the facilities worker at UCLA in AP, which a lot of us know. So there's an essay written exclusively on him and how important he was for all of us when we at our time there as grad students and undergrads. You know, one more thing about working with the service workers was that they're really on top of things. Like we had to get photo permissions to include their pictures in the book. And there was one picture where there's like 20 of them. And I was like, I don't know, Stephanie, how are we gonna get 20 permissions, you know, 20 signatures? I don't know, in like 3 days. I think we're gonna have to cut this picture out. And she was like, oh no, it's good. Like, I'll just text them right now. And she texted them, sent them the form to sign. And like within a few hours, we had 20 signatures. And I was like, damn, like, because if you try to get 20 signatures from faculty, it's not gonna happen. Like it would not happen. So I was like so amazed that they're like on it and just they, you know, organize, they do it. Like that was really eye-opening, like not working with faculty, but with workers. It's a whole different experience and they are so much better to work with.
Well, and they think about like what you're asking them to do and they like want to be helpful. Whereas like, I think, especially when you work in higher ed, you get so caught up in all the other things that you have to do. And they have such a more like community kind of mindset of like, of course, I'm going to help like my fellow, you know, my friends.
But I think even beyond that, I think it's also like Bell Hooks talks about it in that essay I referenced earlier. It's like a reverence for the work, right? They're so proud of the work that they do, that anyone can learn from that level of discipline and commitment. You know, and I think it's something that we overlook a lot of times for campus service workers because we don't honor that type of work in our society, right? So, you know, there's a really great question in the chat by Lindsay, and I know a couple acknowledged it, but are there thoughts or plans to get this in the hands of union organizers or other folks who advocate for campus service workers? And then she provides an example.
I hadn't thought about it till you said it, Lindsay. So we looking at you. Do you want to say something about that? I mean, Lindsay is one of our contributors. So.
No, I just want to say Belinda and I had such like a positive experience, like really working with different folks who I think champion. And when I think about this work, it's telling the stories, but also wanting to do more, right? And when we talked a lot about the level of exploitation, it was really fascinating for Belinda and I to both recognize like the role in which like the institution that we work at participates in that. And it's almost like giving the folks the tools to think about more sustainable ways to support them beyond just what the job description might be, right? So Belinda is a really amazing contact and knows some of the folks. I don't want to volunteer her, but I think that there can be some good opportunities there with particularly in the UCs, one of the most wealthiest places. We all know. So there's no lack of money there. So it's making sure that the folks get the support that they need.
And I see a comment in the chat from Esther, who has, union connections, if that is a particular interest. Stephanie, I think you were going to say something. Are you going to say
I'm
something?
going to add to what Lindsay just said, because a lot of that, it also has to do not just with money and compensation, but also the way that these workers are treated. And I know there's so much infantilizing of the workers. The one example that pops out in my mind is like when we were all little kids and you got, perfect attendance award, which I got problems with anyway, because like not everyone can go to school every day for many, many reasons. But they give those awards to the campus service workers at UCLA, and I'm sure at many other places. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but there was no perfect attendance award for people that worked in the office. And so I think there's this mindset of like that these are kind of overgrown children that we can't really trust. Meanwhile, they're taking their jobs, a lot of them taking their jobs much more seriously than a lot of people I knew that were making, 10 times as much money as them. And so I think it's not just about the compensation or the way that we interact with them, but it's also like a lot of these things on the ground within their departments that could change if we do want them to like truly be part of our community. And that starts with just like, what are the rules that we're imposing on them that nobody else has to follow?
Yeah, and really developing a pipeline either for them or their own families, right? To really gain access to all the resources and the education that the university offers, right? I think that's a population that's really untapped, right? But has a deep relationship and commitment to the institutions that they're located in. There's a great comment by Lydia about, not only the impact on first-gen students, but also, other folks on campus, like the impact that service workers have on campus. Have you thought about Volume 2, opening it up, what campus service workers do to support other folks on campus?
Hell no, first gen for life. Somebody else do that other thing.
But first-gen faculty too, so not just students, but in the book though, right, there is several essays by faculty talking about how workers support them, not just as students, but as faculty, right? Like Jenny Luna's essay in the book talks about how, she stays in her office long hours, and then the cleaning ladies would come by and be like, oh, you work so late, and like they, have conversations late at night and like offer dating advice and like serve as confidants like in the evening hours when she's all alone in her office. And just the work that they do to support not just students but faculty as well, and at work for all of us. I think Lydia was saying too, right, like workers support us in all places that we work. Like it's friendly faces and make us feel and not just friendly faces, but just having someone that you can talk to and relate to, especially in those situations where there's like class divides. I know when I feel really awkward when I go to like fancy faculty, like cocktail things, and I don't really want to, so I always end up, talking to the workers and then like hanging out with them, and I feel more comfortable talking to them, so.
I think Daisy can also talk about this because her essay is about a variety of workers throughout like different stages and different places on her path to becoming a lawyer. Is Daisy still here?
I think she left. But yeah, she was.
Okay.
I can say something if Daisy isn't available. So I want to acknowledge this book is very California centric and UCLA heavy. And so there's so many more opportunities. Like this is not a comprehensive text by any means, right? It scratches the surface. So like Georgina had mentioned at the beginning, there's so many opportunities for more pieces that come from other types of institutions, what would it be like to hear from a community? We really wanted pieces from community colleges. It just didn't happen. We would love to hear about the experiences at HBCUs and HSI. So there's so many ways in which people can contribute to this topic. But I will say, connected to that, about the UCLA or California connection here, it's also representative of our networks too. And so in this case, that happened to be our network. But keep that in mind when you're looking at other books and other collections, and you're saying, oh, everyone's from Stanford. That's because they know each other, right? And so we know each other in this space. It's not because they're smarter than anybody. It's just because of like the connections that they made. So one more thing to just highlight about what it means to be first gen and in this space and what could be contributing to imposter syndrome. This time we got to be the majority, right? So a rare opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of comments in the chat, the latter part of the chat, really acknowledging how, this topic really cuts across, it's first gen students, it's faculty, it's other workers. I think someone else mentioned, Michael also mentioned, how this, even in K through 12, other sort of institutional types, other workplaces, I think that it really just speaks to the relevance, like how relevant this work is to our society, where it's so divided by class and work status, right? And so I just want to commend, like, again, the editors and the contributors of the book for really putting together a culturally rich text that I think is exactly what you're talking about earlier, really illuminating stories that have always been there, but have not had the opportunity to sort of see the light of day, right? So when you mention that, like, these are stories that haven't seen the light of day, one of the things that, sort of triggered one of my reflections is in doing a campus climate survey, we actually also included custodial staff. For example, their opinions are never considered in sort of these larger campus climate sort of assessments. And how there, there's a midnight shift, right? When the whole campus is closed and it's dark and it's scary, like they're there, and invisibilized just by virtue of their schedule. Right, they're literally there, meant to clean the entire campus, and during a time where no one will see them, right? And I think about that when you had mentioned earlier how, again, this book is really highlighting the stories that have never been told. I think that we have to think about how our institutions doesn't act that violence against campus service workers, in a way that they disappear them, right? And again, I just think that this book is so important, right? We have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if Georgina or Stephanie or LT wanted to share any final thoughts with the audience. If the audience wanted to, put things in the chat regarding, but, I want to leave the last 5 minutes for you three to wrap up, what you would like to leave the audience with.
I'll go first because I'll be quick. I just want to acknowledge Lachica Nolan, who has the last piece. She's at Harvard Medical School. And I remember we had to recruit Lachica to participate, and she was so like modest in her writing. Y'all remember her first version of her essay? And we're like, we need more, Ash, we need more from you. Lash, we need more from you. And Lash has just been, I'll put it in the chat, acknowledged by Forbes as one of the 30 for 30 up and coming medical professionals. So just a total badass. But again, like I think she was just like many of us have described, just kind of hesitant to tell her story. And it's not very long, it's a powerful piece, but just another example of the type of folks we have in this collection.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, for bringing up the campus climate thing, and how workers, I don't know if they consult with them to find out about campus climate, right? I doubt it. So I guess what I would like to end with is just to encourage you all, depending on where you work, what your position is, to think about how you can better incorporate campus service workers in the work that you do, and just to think about them, right? And see how it is you can involve them. I know since I started on working on this book, I started thinking of all these opportunities for service learning. Like, I have done it in the community, but I never thought about working with the staff on campus, right? The workers on campus. So that's something like obvious in our face, but we never think about partnering with them. And so, Stephanie's work with Spell at UCLA, and all the students who have those experiences with tutoring and working with campus service workers, that inspired me to do service learning on campus. So yeah, maybe y'all be inspired to do something like that as well, right? So there's always opportunities to learn and be inspired to do more on behalf of others. And I hope that reading the book will help you think about how you can make a change as well.
Yeah, I'll just add real quick to what Georgina's saying. Providing on campus service learning, volunteering, professional development, whatever opportunities, also an equity issue, in my opinion. Not everybody can spend 4 hours on the van in LA traffic to like go to some school in South LA to do their volunteer work. There are people with mobility issues, and I would get requests like that. Stephanie, can you please match me with someone in this area because I have XYZ mobility issue and like I cannot walk up to the hill. Anybody that goes to UCLA knows like you can walk up and down the hill where the dorms are like thousands of times and you will still be out of breath every time. I don't know, it's just like a weird cursed area. And so I would have to think about like some of these things. There's students with social anxiety who are neurodivergent and aren't comfortable in these like big club settings. And so I just want to kind of like tack that on to what Gina was saying. Yeah, I think for me, like, this is what I always come back to with this book and anything that I do is that, like, we're so entrenched in this world that is so violent all the time. And we kind of just accept the confines, like the current limits that we have. But, a better world is possible. And I really believe that. And I think these workers are the ones that really help me see that in action. I know we're all thinking a lot about bell hooks today, and that's something that's been really influential to me is thinking about, being on the margins. And sometimes it's a lonely place to be, but you are kind of, when you're there, you're expanding this circle of who belongs, who's included, and who we value. And sometimes, like I said, the work is lonely, the relationship, it's like you have that connection with someone that supports you so much, whoever it is, not just a service worker, and you get back into like the real world and you're like, oh yeah, everyone hates me for being this, that, the next thing, for being different in some way. So I think for me, it's just reminding myself that we can have a better world and the work that we're doing is important. And the times that we get motivated to keep going are in spaces like this, when we can truly be in community with each other, and not stay in our little corners. And like, that's how we can expand those margins, and help other people be open. So that's kind of like my final thought on the book, the process, the relationships here, and the service workers that are like my heart and soul, truly.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, LT. Thank you, everybody here.
Thank you, Tracy.
Of course, my honor.
Couldn't be anybody else.
Yeah, but thank you, everybody, for joining us. Buy the book. Tell your library to buy the book. Encourage your whatever division you're located in to buy the book. Georgina's sharing some pictures. But thank you again for joining, and please contact LT, Stephanie, and Georgina to set up a book talk at your particular institution or organization, because again, this work is super important. Have a good night, y'all. Thank you, everyone.